The first thing I noticed wasn't the ring. It was the badge. Champagne glasses clicked together across the garden. A photographer kept firing off flashes every few seconds like he was covering a celebrity wedding instead of an engagement party in my father's backyard. Guests laughed under strings of white lights stretched between oak trees. Servers in black uniforms moved through the crowd, carrying trays of crab cakes and mini beef Wellingtons that probably cost more than my first car. And right in the center of it all stood my younger sister, Fiona Pierce. She had positioned herself perfectly for the cameras. Every time she turned her shoulder, the polished sniper badge pinned to her dress uniform caught the sunlight and threw it right back into everyone's eyes. It looked brand new, too new. Our father loved every second of it. Arthur Pierce had already told the same story at least 4 times in the last hour. That didn't stop him from launching into it again, as he guided Donovan's relatives toward Fiona like a tour guide showing off a rare exhibit. "My daughter is one of the deadliest elites in the military," he announced proudly. A few people let out impressed whistles. Someone actually applauded. Fiona smiled modestly for about half a second, before accepting the attention she had been chasing her entire life. I stood near the edge of the patio with a glass of club soda in my hand. Nobody had asked me to be in any photos. Nobody seemed particularly interested that I had also spent my adult life in the military. That wasn't new. I wore dark jeans, a gray button-down shirt, and a pair of boots that had seen better days. Compared to Fiona's perfectly pressed uniform, I looked like somebody who had accidentally wandered into the party while looking for directions. Honestly, that was exactly how my family preferred it. Invisible, predictable, safe. A woman from Donovan's side of the family approached me with a polite smile. "And what do you do?" she asked. Before I could answer, Fiona answered for me. "Oh, Jocelyn works one of those support jobs." She laughed, supply stuff, paperwork, inventory, the exciting military lifestyle. A few guests chuckled. She glanced at me. Must be pretty boring compared to my world. More laughter. I took a sip of my drink, club soda, no ice. The bartender had run out 20 minutes earlier. "Somebody has to keep track of the equipment," I said. The woman smiled awkwardly. The conversation died right there. Good. I wasn't interested in rescuing it. Across the lawn, Donovan was talking with several guests near a custom-built stone fireplace. Unlike most people here, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. Every time I had met him, he had been respectful, calm, the kind of person who listened more than he talked. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Because he had absolutely no idea who he was marrying. Another camera flash went off. Fiona tilted her body again. My eyes stayed on it. Most people only saw shiny metal. I saw mud, rain, blisters, cold. I knew exactly what that badge weighed. Not physically. Personally. I remembered candidates carrying 80-pound packs through terrain that felt designed by someone who hated human beings. I remembered people falling asleep standing up. I remembered watching grown men and women push themselves past limits they didn't know existed. Some earned the badge. Most didn't. That was reality. The badge on Fiona's chest looked like it had never met reality. Not a scratch, not a mark, not even the faint wear that comes from being handled during training. Just clean metal, perfect metal, purchased prestige. I watched her pose for another photo, then another, then another. Every picture told the same lie. Nobody here could see it. Not yet. A server passed by carrying champagne. I shook my head. He moved on. My father suddenly appeared beside me. I smelled his expensive cologne before he spoke. "You could try looking a little happier." I glanced at him. "I am happy." "Doesn't look like it." He adjusted his jacket. "Your sister is having the biggest day of her life." I almost laughed. Arthur had always confused attention with achievement. The louder the applause, the more valuable something became. That was how he measured success. Money, titles, recognition, surface-level things. The funny part was that he genuinely thought he was being fair. "Fiona worked hard for this," he continued. I looked back toward the badge. "Did she?" His expression tightened. There it was. The tiny crack in his confidence. Not enough to matter. Just enough for me to notice. Before he could respond, another group pulled him away. Within seconds, he was smiling again, retelling the same story. One of the deadliest elites in the military. I heard it from 20 feet away. Then 30, then 50. The story kept traveling through the crowd, growing bigger each time. Like all good family myths. As the sun lowered over the property, the garden lights became brighter. Music drifted through hidden speakers, Laughter rolled across the lawn. Everything looked perfect. That was the dangerous thing about appearances. People trust them. They trust polished uniforms, polished speeches, polished reputations. Sometimes they trust them more than the truth. I stared at Fiona's badge one more time. She caught me looking. A smug smile crossed her face. She thought I was jealous. She thought I was standing alone because nobody cared. She thought I was the forgotten older sister with the boring military desk job. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Because while everyone else at that party was looking at a symbol of achievement, I was looking at evidence. And the longer I stared at that spotless badge, the more one thought kept repeating in my head. I knew exactly where Fiona should have earned it. I knew exactly when she failed. And I knew something nobody else at this engagement party could possibly imagine. I had been there both times. I shifted my grip on the glass and looked away from the badge before anyone noticed how long I'd been staring. The music, the laughter, the expensive landscaping, the polished stone patio, all of it started fading into the background. Because the last time that badge had occupied my thoughts, there hadn't been champagne. There had been rain, cold rain, the kind that slips through every layer of clothing, no matter how much money the government spends trying to prevent it. People who have never attended a sniper course usually imagine something completely different. They picture action movies, cool one-liners, long-distance shots, hero moments. Most of them don't picture lying face down in mud for hours while every muscle in your body begs you to move. They definitely don't picture spending 18 straight hours soaked, exhausted, hungry, and wondering whether their next mistake will send them home. That's the reality. The badge comes later. The suffering comes first. Back then, nobody knew me as Jocelyn Pierce. At least not during evaluations. The candidates knew me by one name, Wraith. That was all. No rank, no personal details, no photographs, no introductions. Just Wraith. A faceless instructor hidden inside a ghillie suit. The course demanded objectivity. Nobody received special treatment. Nobody received favors. Everybody suffered equally. The final stalking exercise was where most candidates discovered who they really were, or who they weren't. I could still picture that stretch of training ground as clearly as if I were standing there now. A wide section of uneven terrain surrounded by observation posts, tall grass, shallow depressions, patches of exposed dirt, and one miserable drainage trench running diagonally across the course. That trench had broken more candidates than any obstacle we ever designed. Not because it was difficult, because it arrived after everything else. Sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, stress, days of pressure. The trench was simply where the bill came due. I've watched candidates cry there. I've watched candidates argue with themselves. I've watched people negotiate with God. One Marine actually tried convincing me that a twisted ankle had suddenly become life-threatening the moment he realized he was about to fail. People become creative when quitting starts sounding attractive. The exercise itself was simple. Move hundreds of yards without being detected. Observe, report, remain invisible. Simple on paper, brutal in practice. The successful candidates understood something important. Patience matters more than talent. Discipline matters more than confidence. And ego? Ego gets people spotted, every time. Back at the engagement party, another burst of laughter came from Fiona's table. I glanced over. She was posing for photographs again, different guests. Same smile. The contrast almost made me laugh. Because months earlier, that same smile had disappeared surprisingly fast. The first time Fiona attended the course, I didn't recognize her name immediately. Pierce isn't exactly rare. When I reviewed candidate records, her file looked no different than anyone else's. Then I saw the hometown, then the emergency contact, then the father's name, Arthur Pierce, my father. I sat back in my chair and stared at the paperwork for several seconds. Of all the sniper programs in the country, she had ended up in mine. Part of me considered reporting the conflict immediately. Another instructor offered a simple solution. Want me to take over her evaluation? I thought about it. Then I declined. The evaluation system already had safeguards, multiple instructors, multiple observers, independent scoring. The process didn't care who her sister was, neither would I. Fair was fair. When Fiona arrived, she had no idea I was there. The face veil covered everything. My voice stayed hidden behind radio communication. To her, I was just another ghost in camouflage. Wraith. Nothing more. The first few days weren't terrible. She performed well enough, confident, maybe too confident. She liked being watched, liked being noticed. The problem was that sniper training rewards the exact opposite behavior. The less attention you attract, the better. That lesson never really landed. By the time the final stalking exercise arrived, she was already running on fumes. Everybody was. The rain started shortly after midnight. Temperatures dropped, visibility worsened. Candidates crawled through mud that felt determined to pull them underground. I watched through optics from an observation position, hour after hour. Most kept moving, slowly, painfully, but they kept moving. Then I spotted Fiona. She was inside the drainage trench, exactly where people usually broke. I checked my watch. 3:07 a.m., she hadn't advanced in nearly 20 minutes. Not a good sign. The radio remained silent. Then she finally spoke. Not into the radio, to herself. Complaining, arguing, cursing. The words carried farther than she realized. I watched her remove one glove, then the other, then slam both hands against her thighs. A few minutes later, she quit. Just like that. No injury, no emergency, no medical issue. She simply decided she was done. The second attempt happened months later. Same result, different weather, different excuse, same outcome. She reached the pressure point, then folded. Both times, the paperwork reflected exactly what happened. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't fail Fiona. She failed Fiona. The standards never changed. The instructors never changed. The requirements never changed. Only her willingness to endure changed. Back in the present, another camera flash lit up the garden. Fiona tilted her head and smiled for the photographer. The badge gleamed again. The guests admired it. The family celebrated it. And none of them knew the truth. For months, I had kept that truth to myself. Not because I was protecting Fiona, because professional integrity mattered. The course wasn't about family drama. The evaluation wasn't personal. I had signed dozens of failure reports over the years. Hers was simply one more, or at least it should have been. Then somehow she ended up wearing the badge anyway. Not earned, acquired. Administrative loopholes have a funny way of appearing when ambitious people know the right offices to call. I still didn't know every detail. I only knew the outcome. And now that outcome was standing 20 yards away, smiling for pictures while guests congratulated her for accomplishments that never happened. That changed everything. Because an embarrassing lie is one thing. Stolen valor is another. And the longer I watched Fiona enjoying her spotlight, the more I realized this wasn't becoming uncomfortable anymore. It was becoming dangerous. A waiter began guiding guests towards the dinner tables before I had the chance to think too much about what came next. The engagement party shifted gears smoothly. People drifted beneath the string light stratus across the gardens and conversations blended with soft music coming from hidden speakers near the flower beds. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across the white tablecloths. From a distance, it looked like one of those events people spend years bragging about afterward. Up close, it looked like a lie getting more comfortable. I found my assigned seat and sat down across from Fiona. Of course I did. My father had arranged the seating chart himself, probably because he thought it looked good in photographs. Arthur sat beside Fiona. Donovan sat on her other side. I ended up directly facing all three of them. Lucky me. The first course arrived, then the second. Wine kept flowing, so did compliments. Every few minutes, someone congratulated Fiona on her military achievements. Every few minutes, she accepted the praise like she had personally invented courage. The strange thing was that Donovan never seemed entirely comfortable with it. He smiled when appropriate. He congratulated her when expected. But occasionally I caught him studying details instead of celebrating them. Little things. Questions. Observations. His older brother had spent years in special operations. People around military communities develop instincts. Sometimes they don't even realize it. By the time the main course arrived, Fiona had reached the stage where confidence and wine begin cooperating. That's usually dangerous. The turning point came from Donovan's uncle, a retired attorney named Malcolm Reed. Sharp guy. The kind of man who could sound friendly while cross-examining you. He cut into his steak, took a sip of red wine, and smiled toward Fiona. She brightened immediately. What? I've heard about the badge all afternoon. A few guests laughed. Malcolm nodded. I want the real story. What story? The hardest moment. The entire table grew interested. What was the toughest thing you had to do during training? Fiona smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a cautious smile. A performer hearing applause before stepping onto the stage. Oh, definitely the final stalking exercise. I stopped cutting my steak. Not visibly, just enough. Here we go. Several guests leaned closer. Even Arthur looked excited. Fiona straightened in her chair. The instructors called it the breaking point. Already wrong. Nobody called it that. But she continued. They dropped us into this awful terrain after days without sleep. That part was close enough. We were crawling through freezing mud all night while instructors hunted us. Not exactly. Observation and detection weren't hunting. But accuracy had clearly left the building. A few people nodded with fascination. She kept going. The worst instructor was this guy everyone feared. I felt Donovan glance briefly toward her. Then she said it. They called him Wraith. Several guests reacted immediately. The nickname sounded dramatic, which was exactly why she used it. Wraith was ruthless. She shook her head dramatically. Absolutely ruthless. Now she had an audience. And she knew it. He'd fail people for the smallest mistake. Not true. He enjoyed making candidates quit. Definitely not true. He was basically a legend. Now we were entering fiction. Arthur looked impressed. Donovan's relatives looked fascinated. I quietly picked up my fork. Fiona continued building her story. According to her version, she had crawled nearly a mile through freezing conditions while carrying equipment that apparently weighed twice as much as reality. According to her version, multiple candidates quit around her. According to her version, she alone pushed forward. Naturally, heroes in fake stories are always alone. Then she reached the part that almost made me laugh. The final observation post was impossible. She paused dramatically. I remember spotting Wraith through my optics. I nearly choked on my water. Not because the story was believable, because it was impossible. Candidates never identified observation personnel during that exercise. That was literally the point. Yet nobody at the table knew that, so the story continued. I knew he was watching me. No, you didn't. I knew he wanted me to fail. No, you didn't. But I outsmarted him. Now several guests were smiling. They loved it. Underdog stories always sell, even fake ones. Fiona leaned forward. I got so close he couldn't even detect me. The woman beside Malcolm looked amazed. Really? Fiona nodded proudly. Oh yeah. Then came the masterpiece. The funny part? She laughed. At the end of the exercise, Wraith practically admitted defeat. The table erupted with interest. Arthur was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. What happened? Someone asked. Fiona lifted her wineglass. He told me I was one of the most naturally talented candidates he'd ever seen. I lowered my eyes to my plate. Not because I was embarrassed, because I genuinely didn't trust my face. The absurdity was becoming impressive. She wasn't merely lying, she was directing a movie. According to Fiona's version of events, Wraith had become a supporting character whose primary purpose was recognizing her greatness. A useful fictional device. Particularly awkward when the actual person she was talking about happened to be sitting 15 feet away. Arthur raised his glass proudly. That's my daughter. Several guests followed his lead. More congratulations, more admiration, more applause. I cut another piece of steak, slowly, methodically. The knife moved cleanly through the meat. I focused on that. Not the story, not the badge, not the fact that my father was celebrating a fantasy. People often imagine anger as something explosive. In reality, anger can become very quiet, especially when facts are on your side, especially when you know the truth doesn't need help. Across the table, Fiona accepted another round of praise. She was completely relaxed now, completely comfortable. The danger of repeated lies is that eventually the liar starts believing them. Watching her speak, I wasn't sure where performance ended anymore. Maybe she actually remembered it this way now. Maybe she'd told the story enough times that reality no longer mattered. That possibility bothered me more than the lie itself. Because once someone starts rewriting their own history, almost anything becomes possible. Donovan wasn't applauding. That caught my attention. He was listening, carefully. His smile had faded, not dramatically, just enough. His brother's military background was probably creating friction between what he was hearing and what made sense. He didn't interrupt, he didn't challenge her. But I noticed something important. For the first time all evening, he wasn't looking at Fiona. He was looking at me. And when our eyes met across the table, I got the distinct feeling that he had just realized something didn't fit. He simply hadn't figured out what yet. He kept studying me for several seconds before turning his attention back to Fiona. Most people missed it. I didn't. The difference between curiosity and suspicion is small. Donovan was getting very close to crossing that line. The conversation moved on for a few minutes. Dessert menus appeared. More wine arrived. Guests drifted into side discussions about business, real estate, and wedding plans. Fiona looked pleased with herself. Why wouldn't she? Her performance had landed exactly the way she wanted. People believed her. Arthur believed her. Most of Donovan's family believed her. As far as she knew, the evening was a complete success. Then Donovan casually set down his wine glass. So during that final stalking exercise, Fiona immediately smiled. Here comes another compliment, she probably thought. What about it? Donovan leaned back in his chair. His tone remained relaxed, friendly, dangerously friendly. You mentioned that last observation point. Yeah, the one where you got close to Wraith, right? He nodded. I've always been curious about something. Fiona looked delighted. Ask away. Donovan glanced briefly toward his uncle. My brother talks about wind calls all the time. A few guests looked confused. Arthur looked bored already. Donovan continued. If I remember correctly, you said your final shot was taken during a crosswind. Fiona hesitated. Only for a moment. But I saw it. Donovan nodded. What holdover were you using? The smile on Fiona's face weakened slightly. What do you mean? The mill dot correction. He shrugged casually. For the wind, silence. Not complete silence, just enough. The kind that lasts 1 second longer than comfortable. Fiona blinked. Then again. I knew exactly what was happening. People can memorize stories, people can memorize terminology. What they can't easily fake is understanding, especially under pressure. She took a sip of wine, buying time. Well, another pause. I mostly trusted my instincts. Sure. Then waited. Nothing else came. Several guests exchanged glances. Fiona attempted a recovery. I mean, at that point you don't really calculate. You absolutely do. You just kind of feel it. Donovan's eyebrow moved slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me. He knew that answer wasn't right. Fiona kept talking. When you're highly trained, the bullet sort of compensates. I almost dropped my fork. The bullet sort of compensates. That was a new one. Even Malcolm looked confused. Compensates? He asked. Yeah. She nodded quickly. For the wind. The table went quiet. A few people were clearly lost. They didn't know enough to identify the problem. But they knew enough to recognize uncertainty, and uncertainty had just entered the room. Donovan remained polite, almost painfully polite. So what was the actual correction? Fiona froze. Again. The answer should have come immediately, not because everyone remembers exact numbers forever, because people who actually perform those calculations understand the process. She didn't. And everybody could see it. Her polished confidence started slipping, not dramatically, just little cracks, tiny fractures. Enough. I think it was around 10 mils. Donovan stared. I stared at my plate. 10 mils, good lord. At the distance, she claimed, that correction would have sent the shot into another zip code. Nobody laughed, which somehow made it worse. The table became uncomfortably still. Arthur looked irritated, not at Fiona, at the conversation. Technical discussions bored him. He preferred applause. I decided to help, or at least that's how it would appear. I set down my fork. Maybe you're thinking of Moa. Every head turned toward me. My tone stayed calm, friendly, not threatening. Fiona's eyes narrowed immediately. What? I shrugged. For the conditions you described. I took a sip of water. 10 mils would be extreme. Donovan looked interested, very interested, I continued. If we're talking roughly 800 yards, moderate crosswind, standard atmospheric conditions. I paused. You're probably looking at something closer to 1.2 to 1.6 mils, depending on velocity and direction. Silence. Real silence this time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words had landed differently than I expected. Not because they were complicated, because they sounded natural. I hadn't recited them. I'd remembered them. The difference matters. Donovan noticed immediately. His posture changed, slightly, almost imperceptibly. Fiona noticed too. Her expression hardened. Arthur let out a dismissive laugh. There we go. Several guests looked toward him. My older daughter read something online and now she's correcting actual experts. A few people chuckled awkwardly. Arthur smiled proudly at Fiona. You don't need to defend yourself. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Donovan still hadn't looked away from me. That was becoming a problem for Fiona. Because he wasn't examining my words, he was examining how I delivered them. People who learn information from books sound different from people who learned it lying behind a rifle. One group recalls facts. The other recalls experiences. The distinction is difficult to fake. Fiona tried regaining control. There's more than one way to calculate wind. Technically true. Practically irrelevant. I nodded. Absolutely. That seemed to surprise her. I wasn't trying to trap her, at least not openly. She expected an argument. I wasn't giving her one. The easiest way to expose bad information is to let it stand beside accurate information. Eventually, people notice. Donovan leaned forward slightly. So you've spent time around shooting? There it was. The first direct question. Arthur answered before I could. Nothing serious. I almost smiled. My father had no idea how funny that statement was. Just hobbies. Arthur waved a dismissive hand. Jocelyn reads manuals. That's her thing. Several guests laughed politely. I nodded. Something like that. Then I took another drink of water. The conversation eventually shifted. People welcomed the escape. Nobody enjoys prolonged awkwardness. But the atmosphere had changed, not dramatically, subtly, like a rope being tightened 1 inch at a time. Across the table, Fiona became quieter. Across the table, Donovan became more attentive. And for the rest of dinner, every time military topics surfaced, I caught him doing the same thing. He would listen to Fiona speak. Then he would glance toward me. Not because he had answers yet, because he had questions, and questions are dangerous, especially when they're pointed at someone who already knows the truth. She caught him looking at me again. That was the moment everything changed. Not immediately, not dramatically. Just a small shift in Fiona's expression. A tightening around the eyes, a forced smile that stayed on her face half a second too long. Most people missed it. I didn't. People who crave attention develop sensitive radar. The second someone else's spotlight grows brighter, they feel it. And Fiona was definitely feeling it. The dinner continued, but she never fully recovered. Every military story she told afterward landed a little flatter. Every joke earned slightly less laughter. Every compliment seemed smaller than the one before. Meanwhile, Donovan kept asking occasional questions. Nothing aggressive, nothing confrontational. Just enough to keep her uncomfortable. A few guests eventually left their seats and wandered toward the dance area near the garden. Others gathered around outdoor heaters. The engagement party loosened into smaller conversations. The formal dinner portion was ending. Normally, that would have been the end of it. Normally, people would have gone home. Normally, Fiona could have survived a few awkward questions and moved on. But ego rarely chooses the safe exit. It prefers the dramatic one. I was finishing the last of my coffee when Fiona suddenly laughed, loudly. The kind of laugh designed to pull attention from 3 different conversations at once. It worked. Heads turned. She stood from her chair, holding a wine glass, smiling. Dangerous combination. You know what's funny? Nobody answered, which never stops people like Fiona. She pointed toward me. Jocelyn suddenly becoming a sniper expert tonight. A few guests chuckled. Arthur immediately smiled. He thought this was harmless. He was wrong. I leaned back in my chair. Not really. More laughter. Fiona smiled wider. Oh, come on. She looked toward Donovan's relatives. You'd think she was the one who earned the badge. A few uncomfortable glances appeared around the table. Donovan didn't laugh. Neither did Malcolm. That seemed to irritate her further. Then came the mistake. The big one. The kind that feels brilliant when pride is driving and terrible when reality arrives. My father owned 20 acres behind the property. Most of it was undeveloped. Several years earlier, he had spent a ridiculous amount of money building a private shooting range near the tree line. Arthur barely used it. Mostly because Arthur liked owning expensive things more than learning how to use them. The range itself was impressive. Covered shooting stations, electronic target systems, steel targets stretching out to long distances, professional-grade equipment. It was basically a luxury toy. Fiona suddenly pointed toward the darkness beyond the garden. Why don't we settle this? A few guests looked interested. She smiled. This. Then she pointed directly at me. The attention of the entire party shifted. I set down my coffee cup slowly. Fiona. No. She laughed. Seriously. Her confidence was returning. At least she thought it was. Let's have a little fun. Arthur immediately perked up. He loved public competitions, especially when he thought he already knew the winner. What kind of fun? Fiona grinned. A shooting competition. Several guests reacted immediately, some excited, some surprised, some concerned. Donovan belonged firmly in the last category. His smile disappeared. Mine didn't appear. Fiona folded her arms. Come on, Jocelyn. There it was. The performance, the mockery, the audience, everything she needed. Let's see if you can handle a real rifle. A few people laughed. She wasn't finished. Or if you're only good at counting bullets in the warehouse. Bigger laughter this time. Arthur nearly spilled his drink. That's good. Of course he loved it. He thought he was watching a comedy, not a train heading toward a bridge that no longer existed. I glanced toward Donovan. The discomfort on his face had become obvious. He knew something was wrong. Maybe not what, but definitely something. Fiona, he said quietly. Maybe that's not. X. She waved him off. It's friendly. The most dangerous word in family conflicts. Nothing ugly is ever called ugly while it's happening. It's always a joke, always harmless, always friendly, until somebody gets hurt. Arthur stood up, now fully invested. Actually, that's a great idea. Of course it was. From his perspective, this would be hilarious. His decorated daughter versus his boring daughter. His champion versus his clerk. The outcome seemed obvious. Several guests started encouraging it. A few pulled out phones. Somebody actually yelled, "Let's do it!" I almost felt bad for them. Almost. Fiona looked at me triumphantly. She thought she had cornered me. That was the funny part. She still believed this situation was about proving she was better. She hadn't realized the conversation stopped being about comparison a long time ago. Now it was about exposure. The difference matters. A lot. Arthur clapped his hands together. Come on, Jocelyn. I could hear the amusement in his voice. Don't tell me you're scared. That earned another round of laughter. I wasn't offended. You can't really insult someone using information that isn't true. I looked down at the folded napkin beside my plate, then at the untouched water glass, then at Fiona. For a moment, nobody spoke. The garden seemed quieter. The music felt farther away. Even the guests sensed something shifting. Not because they knew the truth, because anticipation has a sound, a feeling, a pressure, and suddenly it was everywhere. Fiona lifted her chin, waiting, expecting hesitation, expecting excuses, expecting retreat. What she received instead was much simpler. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, stood up, no speech, no argument, no warning, just one sentence. The smile vanished from Donovan's face completely. Arthur burst out laughing. The guests erupted with excitement. Phones came out, chairs scraped backward. People immediately started moving toward the edge of the property, like spectators following a parade. Only one person looked uncertain now, and for the first time all evening it wasn't me, it was Fiona. The hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was there, just long enough for me to notice. Then she forced the smile back onto her face and started leading everyone toward the range. I followed a few steps behind. The crowd trailing after us grew larger with every yard. And somewhere between the garden lights and the dark tree line beyond the property, I had the distinct feeling that this engagement party had officially stopped being a celebration. It was becoming a demonstration. The crowd spread out behind the firing line as we reached the range. The energy had changed completely. Nobody was thinking about the engagement party anymore. The string lights were now distant points behind us. The last of the evening sun hung low over the property, stretching long shadows across the open field. Beyond the firing positions, steel targets stood at various distances against a backdrop of rolling terrain and darkening trees. Arthur loved showing off this place. He'd spent a small fortune building it. A bronze plaque near the entrance still carried the name of the contractor who designed it. I remembered Arthur bragging about the final bill, $184,632.77, as if overspending was somehow a competitive sport. Tonight, that expensive toy was about to become something else. Fiona walked confidently toward the rifle racks. The audience followed. Phones were already recording. Several guests were whispering. Others were smiling, expecting entertainment. Arthur looked thrilled. Donovan looked worried. I noticed that immediately. He wasn't worried about me embarrassing myself. He was worried about Fiona embarrassing herself. That distinction mattered. Fiona selected Arthur's favorite rifle, a custom-built precision rifle with premium optics and enough aftermarket upgrades to make any gun store employee emotional. Arthur practically beamed. That's the one. Of course it was. It always was. Fiona settled into position while guests gathered behind her. The electronic target display lit up. Someone started counting down like we were watching a sporting event. 3 shots, mid-range steel, nothing complicated. Fiona took her time. She adjusted the stock, adjusted her position, adjusted it again, then finally fired. The first steel plate rang. A few guests clapped. The second shot landed too. More applause. The third connected after a brief correction. Polite cheers followed. To most people, it looked impressive. And to be fair, it wasn't terrible. The problem was that I wasn't most people. I saw the details, the rushed breathing, The inconsistent shoulder pressure, the way she anticipated recoil, the way her position shifted slightly after every shot. Little things. The kind of things nobody notices until they spend years teaching them. Fiona stood up smiling. The crowd rewarded her performance. Arthur applauded louder than everyone. There we go. Several guests congratulated her. A few looked toward me with expressions that practically said good luck. Fiona turned around. The confidence was back. The spotlight felt safe again. She handed the rifle toward me. I didn't take it. It confused her. You don't want this one? No. I walked past the custom rifle, past another expensive rifle, past a third. Then I stopped at the far end of the rack. There sat an old hunting rifle, nothing special. The finish was worn. The stock carried scratches from years of use, no fancy accessories, no prestige, just a rifle. Arthur frowned. You're using that. Yep. A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. Fiona laughed. Big mistake. She thought equipment mattered more than skill. People make that mistake all the time. The rifle wasn't what interested me. The fundamentals were. I picked it up. And the moment my hands touched the metal, something shifted. Not intentionally, just naturally. Years of repetition have a way of revealing themselves. My body already knew what to do. The crowd grew quieter. I could feel it. Not because anyone understood exactly what they were seeing. Because confidence looks different when it's real. I walked toward the firing position. No hesitation, no unnecessary movement, no performance. The range disappeared. The audience disappeared. The party disappeared. For a brief moment, it felt familiar. Comfortably familiar. I dropped into the prone position. One smooth motion, no adjustments, no fidgeting, no searching for comfort. The rifle settled naturally. 3 seconds, maybe less. Behind me, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than applause. I looked through the optic. 500 yards. Steel plate. Simple. Breathing steady. Trigger press. Ping. The sound echoed across the property. The reaction behind me was immediate, not cheering. Surprise, before it could fully register, I moved to the next target. 800 yards, a little farther, a little smaller. Same process, same calm, same discipline. Ping. The second impact rang across the range. This time nobody said a word. I heard someone lower their phone. I heard someone else whisper, "What?" Then I moved again, 1,000 yards. The furthest steel target available. The one Arthur usually bragged about but rarely touched. The evening air had shifted slightly. Nothing dramatic. Just at the adjustment. Settled. Pressed. Ping. The steel answered almost immediately. Clear. Clean. Undeniable. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody clapped. The silence was complete. Not because people were unimpressed. Because their brains were still catching up. I cleared the rifle, set it down, then stood up. Slowly, calmly. Exactly the same way I'd stood up thousands of times before. When I turned around, the expressions waiting for me were worth more than any speech. Arthur looked confused, deeply confused. The kind of confusion that appears when reality refuses to cooperate with a lifelong assumption. Several guests stared openly. One man had his mouth hanging slightly open. Malcolm looked fascinated, almost amused. Like a lawyer who had just discovered evidence nobody else noticed. But Donovan wasn't confused. He was shocked, absolute shock. Not because I hit the targets. Because of how I hit them. Because people who understand shooting know the difference between luck and mastery. He had just witnessed mastery, and he knew it. His eyes stayed locked on me. Searching, connecting dots. Replaying every conversation from dinner, every answer, every correction, every detail. Across the firing line, Fiona hadn't moved. The smile she'd been wearing all evening was gone. Not weakened, gone. For the first time since this engagement party began, she wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't looking at Arthur. She wasn't looking at the badge on her uniform. She was looking directly at me. And for the first time all night, there was no arrogance in her eyes, only uncertainty. The dangerous kind. The kind that appears right before someone realizes they may not understand the situation they're standing in. The uncertainty lasted only a few seconds before panic took over. And panic always makes people do stupid things. The crowd remained frozen around the firing line. Nobody seemed quite sure how to react. A moment earlier, they had expected a harmless family joke. Now they were staring at something none of them could explain. Fiona's face had gone pale, not because I hit the targets, because of what those shots meant. Deep down, she knew something wasn't adding up. Nobody accidentally shoots like that. Nobody casually picks up an old hunting rifle and rings steels at 1,000 yards without years of experience. The math simply didn't work. And she knew it. The problem was that she couldn't admit it. Not here, not in front of the guests, not in front of Donovan. Definitely not in front of our father. So she did what desperate people often do. She attacked. "You got lucky." The words came out sharper than she intended. Several heads turned toward her. I said nothing. Fiona pointed directly at me. Her hand wasn't steady. Most people didn't notice. I did. That's all this was. Nobody responded. The silence forced her to keep talking. One lucky round. 3 rounds, 3 distances. But who's counting? She swallowed, then forced a laugh that convinced absolutely nobody. "You're still just a clerk." There it was again. The old story, the comfortable story, the version of me she'd been selling all evening. Her voice grew louder, more aggressive, trying to convince herself as much as everyone else. "You have no idea what it takes to earn this." She tapped the badge pinned to her chest. The small metallic sound seemed unusually loud. Nobody laughed, nobody nodded, nobody came to her rescue. Even Arthur looked uncertain now. Not convinced, just uncertain. And uncertainty was something Fiona couldn't tolerate. She pointed at the badge again. "This isn't something you understand." I looked at it, the polished metal, the spotless finish. The symbol she'd spent all night using as armor. Then I started walking toward her. Slowly, no rush, no anger, no drama. The crowd instinctively moved aside. I could feel every pair of eyes following me. The evening breeze had picked up, slightly. The range had gone completely quiet. Even the people recording with their phones seemed afraid to move. Fiona stood her ground, at least physically. Emotionally, she was already backing away. I stopped directly in front of her, close enough that only she could hear what came next. She lifted her chin, trying to look defiant, trying to look confident, trying to hold together a story that was beginning to collapse. I didn't raise my voice, didn't accuse her, didn't insult her. I simply leaned closer and whispered, "My hands are too numb." The reaction was immediate. Her eyes blinked. Once. Confusion. Then recognition started creeping in. I continued. "I can't breathe." The color began leaving her face. Not gradually. Instantly. Like someone had flipped a switch. Her mouth opened slightly. No words came out. The crowd behind us couldn't understand what was happening. I could. Because I'd seen that expression before. Candidates wore it when reality arrived. I finished the sentence. Exactly as she had spoken it. Exactly as it happened. "I just want to go back to my hotel." Everything stopped. For a moment, Fiona forgot to breathe, literally. Her chest froze, her eyes widened, and suddenly I wasn't standing in front of her anymore, not in her mind. In her mind, she was back in the trench. Back in the mud, back in the freezing darkness, back at 3:07 in the morning, back at the moment she quit. I watched the realization hit, first confusion, then disbelief, then terror, pure terror. The kind that cannot be faked. The kind that arrives when someone discovers a ghost has a face. Her lips trembled. No, barely audible. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The truth had already arrived. Her eyes searched mine desperately, looking for an escape. Looking for an alternative explanation. There wasn't one. Months earlier, hidden beneath a ghillie suit and face veil, I had been the instructor watching her through my optics. I had heard every complaint, every excuse, every surrender. She knew it now, every second of it. "You..." The word broke apart halfway through. I simply held her gaze. Around us, confusion spread through the guests. Donovan stepped forward slightly. Arthur looked completely lost. Nobody understood the conversation. Nobody except Fiona, and that made it worse, because now she was alone with the truth. I reached into my pocket, slowly, no sudden movements, no dramatic reveal. Just a folded piece of paper, one piece of paper, months old. Worn from being carried. I had never intended to use it. Honestly, I had forgotten it was still there. Until tonight, until the badge, until the stories, until the lies. I unfolded it once, then handed it to her. She stared at it without moving. For several seconds, she didn't even take it. Then finally her fingers closed around the paper. The shaking was obvious now. No point hiding it anymore. She opened it, looked down, and stopped. Completely. The document wasn't complicated. Official course paperwork, administrative language, final determination, failure. The signature sat at the bottom. Small, simple, unavoidable. Master Sergeant J. Pierce. I watched her eyes reach that line. The effect was devastating. Whatever fight remained inside her disappeared. Gone, no argument, no denial, no comeback. Because documents don't care about emotions. Paperwork doesn't care about pride. Records don't care about family myths. Facts are stubborn things. Across the range, Donovan finally moved closer. His eyes shifted from Fiona to the paper. Then from the paper to me, the pieces were coming together, fast. Arthur still looked confused, but even he could sense the atmosphere changing. The guests weren't smiling anymore. Nobody was recording now. Nobody was cheering. Nobody was treating this like entertainment. Because entertainment had ended, reality had arrived. And standing there under the fading evening light, watching Fiona stare at the signature she never expected to see, I realized something important. The badge wasn't protecting her anymore. It had become evidence. The paper slipped from Fiona's fingers and drifted onto the grass. Nobody rushed to pick it up. Nobody rushed to say anything. The entire range stood frozen in a silence that felt completely different from the one after my shots. That silence had been surprise. This silence was understanding. Not complete understanding. Most of the guests still didn't know every detail, but they knew enough. Enough to recognize a lie when it collapsed. Enough to recognize the difference between confidence and competence. Enough to recognize that something they had celebrated all evening was no longer standing upright. I looked at Fiona one last time. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires energy. What stood in front of me now looked exhausted. Her shoulders had dropped. Her face had lost all color. The badge still sat on her uniform, but it no longer seemed important. A few hours earlier, she had built her entire identity around that piece of metal. Now it looked strangely small. I didn't feel victorious. That surprised me. For months, I had imagined what might happen if the truth ever came out. I expected satisfaction, maybe relief, maybe even a little bitterness. Instead, I felt tired. Not because of Fiona, because of what had been wasted. The energy, the deception, the years spent chasing appearances instead of substance. I could have said 100 things. I could have explained exactly how she failed. I could have described both attempts. I could have listed every excuse she made, every shortcut she took, every opportunity she threw away. The crowd would have listened. But there was no point. The truth was already standing there. Nobody needed a speech, so I simply turned around. That was it. No dramatic exits, no final insult, no victory lap. I started walking back toward the parking area. The gravel path stretched away from the range toward the main house. Behind me, nobody called my name. For several seconds, all I heard were my own footsteps. Then I heard another set. I glanced sideways. Donovan, of course. He caught up with me halfway down the driveway. Neither of us spoke immediately. We walked a few more steps in silence. The sounds of the party were gone now. No music, no laughter. Just distant voices carrying across the property. Behind us, somebody finally picked up the failure report. I didn't need to turn around to know who. Donovan stopped walking. So did I. For a moment, he simply stood there. Thinking, processing. The same way a person studies a puzzle after discovering the missing piece. Finally, he looked back toward the range, then toward me. You were Wraith. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. That was enough. He exhaled slowly. Not shocked anymore, just disappointed. Not in me, in the situation, in Fiona, in everything he'd learned over the last 10 minutes. He rubbed the back of his neck. My brother told me something years ago. I waited. He said real professionals almost never talk about how good they are. I smiled slightly. Smart guy. That earned the smallest laugh of the evening. Then the humor disappeared. Donovan glanced back toward the range again. The failure report was now in Arthur's hands. Even from a distance, I could see him staring at it, reading, rereading, trying to make reality fit inside the version of the world he'd built for himself. It wasn't going well. Arthur Pierce had spent years believing he understood his daughters. One was exceptional. One was ordinary. One made him proud. One barely registered. Simple story. Comfortable story. The problem with simple stories is that reality eventually shows up, and reality rarely cooperates. From where I stood, I could see Fiona sitting alone on a bench near the firing line. Nobody was surrounding her anymore. Nobody was applauding. Nobody was taking pictures. For the first time all evening, she wasn't the center of attention. Oddly enough, I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she got caught. Because she never understood what actually mattered. All that effort spent chasing recognition. All that effort spent trying to look impressive. And for what? A few hours of applause, a few photographs, a few compliments from strangers. Donovan followed my gaze. Then he looked back at me. There was something different in his expression now. Respect, real respect, the quiet kind. Not admiration, not hero worship, just respect. The kind earned between adults, the kind that doesn't need words. He extended his hand. I shook it. Firm grip, Simple, no speeches, no dramatic accelerations, just acknowledgement. Then he nodded. Take care of yourself, Jocelyn, you too. That was all. He turned and walked back toward the range, toward the family, toward the difficult conversations waiting for him. I continued toward my truck, the same truck I'd driven there, the same truck nobody had noticed parked near the edge of the property. Funny how that worked. People notice luxury cars. People notice expensive uniforms. People notice shiny badges. They often miss everything else. I climbed inside and closed the door. For a moment, I sat there without starting the engine. The sky had darkened completely. The last traces of daylight had disappeared beyond the trees. Then I finally started the truck and pulled onto the road. The property faded into the rearview mirror. The engagement party disappeared. The noise disappeared. The drama disappeared. What remained was something much simpler. A lesson. One I've seen repeated throughout my career. People spend enormous amounts of time trying to appear strong, trying to appear accomplished, trying to appear worthy of respect. But dignity doesn't work that way. Respect doesn't work that way. You can't buy them. You can't borrow them. You can't pin them to your chest and expect them to become real. The things that matter most are usually earned where nobody is watching, in uncomfortable places, in difficult moments, in the dark, in the cold, in the mud. That's where character gets built, not at engagement parties, not in front of cameras, not under applause. As the highway stretched ahead of me, I thought about Fiona one final time. The truth was, I hadn't destroyed her reputation. I hadn't ruined her evening. I hadn't exposed her with some elaborate plan. I simply refused to participate in her fiction. Everything that happened after that belonged to her. Vanity had done the heavy lifting. The lie had collapsed under its own weight. And somewhere behind me, a polished badge was finally carrying the burden it should have carried all along. The truth. The highway stretched for miles ahead of me, and somewhere between the second gas station and a billboard advertising personal injury lawyers, I realized something that surprised me. The thing bothering me most wasn't Fiona's lie. It wasn't the badge. It wasn't even the way my father had spent years dismissing me. What bothered me most was how much time Fiona had wasted. Think about it. The woman spent years chasing recognition, years chasing attention, years chasing applause, and in the end, she got exactly what she wanted. People looked at her. People admired her. People praised her. For a few hours. Then it disappeared. That's the problem with building your life around other people's approval. You become dependent on something you can't control. One of the first lessons I learned in the military had nothing to do with rifles, tactics, or field exercises. It was much simpler than that. The people who are truly exceptional are usually the least interested in telling you they are exceptional. I learned that lesson from a gunnery sergeant named Marcus Holloway. The man looked like somebody's tired uncle who fixed air conditioners on weekends. His pickup truck had a cracked taillight. His boots were always dusty. He drank terrible coffee. And he happened to be one of the most capable men I'd ever met. You would never know it by looking at him. He never talked about himself, never bragged, never corrected people who underestimated him. He simply showed up and did the work, over and over again. One afternoon, a younger Marine spent almost 20 minutes explaining something to him that he clearly already knew. Everyone else in the room was getting annoyed. Marcus just listened. When the Marine finally finished, Marcus quietly solved the problem in 2 minutes. No speech, no humiliation, no "I told you so." Just results. That stuck with me. Because competence has a certain calmness to it. People who know what they're doing don't feel the need to advertise it every 5 minutes. The skill speaks for itself. The results speak for themselves. The work speaks for itself. And if nobody notices, they keep working anyway. That's the part Fiona never understood. She wanted the symbol. She didn't want the process. She wanted the applause. She didn't want the sacrifice. She wanted people to admire her. She didn't want to become the person worthy of admiration. There's a difference, a huge difference. And honestly, I think a lot of people fall into the same trap, not just in the military, everywhere. I've seen people spend more time designing social media posts than improving the actual parts of their lives those posts are supposed to represent. I've seen people buy expensive things they couldn't afford because they wanted strangers to think they were successful. I've seen employees spend more energy managing impressions than improving their skills. I've even seen people stay in miserable relationships simply because they liked how the relationship looked from the outside. We live in a world that rewards appearances quickly. Substance takes longer, a lot longer. A certificate can be printed in an afternoon. A reputation can take 20 years. A title can be handed to you. Character cannot. That's why shortcuts are so dangerous. Shortcuts give you the appearance of success before you've built the foundation to support it. Eventually, reality shows up. And reality always collects its debt, one way or another. What happened to Fiona didn't begin at the engagement party. It didn't begin at the shooting range. It didn't begin when she obtained a badge she hadn't earned. It started years earlier when she began choosing recognition over growth. One decision at a time, one shortcut at a time, one excuse at a time. That's how these things happen. Not through one giant mistake, through hundreds of small ones. The funny thing is that talent was never her problem. People often assume stories like this are about talented people versus untalented people. They're not. I've seen incredibly gifted individuals fail because they couldn't handle discomfort. And I've seen average people accomplish remarkable things because they refuse to quit. Talent helps. Discipline lasts. Character lasts longer. The sniper course taught me that. Life keeps proving it. If you've watched this story and found yourself thinking about someone like Fiona, I'd encourage you to pause for a moment. Think about yourself instead. Ask a simple question. Are you spending more time building the image of success than building the skills that create success? That's not an accusation. It's a question I've had to ask myself more than once. Because we're all vulnerable to it, every single one of us. The temptation to look successful is often stronger than the desire to become successful. One path is fast, the other is real. And if there's one thing I learned from everything that happened with Fiona, it's this. The world eventually discovers the difference. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, maybe not next year, but eventually. The applause fades, the audience leaves. The photographs get forgotten, and all that's left is what you actually earned. That's the part nobody can fake. And that's the only part that truly matters. That realization stayed with me long after the engagement party was over. Not because of Fiona, because of something much bigger. The longer I thought about everything that happened, the more I became convinced that the most dangerous lie isn't the one we tell other people. It's the one we tell ourselves. Most people think deception starts when someone knowingly says something false. Sometimes that's true. But the really dangerous version happens when a person repeats a story so many times that they eventually start believing it. That's when reality becomes optional. And that's when real damage begins. To this day, the thing that shocked me most about Fiona wasn't that she lied to Donovan's family. It wasn't that she wore a badge she hadn't earned. It wasn't even that she told stories about training that never happened. What shocked me was how natural it all sounded. There wasn't any hesitation, no guilt, no visible struggle. She spoke as if those memories genuinely belonged to her. And maybe, in her mind, they did. That possibility bothered me more than anything else. Because I've seen that happen before. Not just in military environments. Everywhere. I once worked with a Marine who failed a major qualification course 3 separate times. Every failure came from the same problem. Preparation. He never studied enough, never practiced enough, never took feedback seriously. Yet every time he failed, he had a new explanation. The instructors were unfair. The standards were unrealistic. The timing was bad. The evaluation process was flawed. The weather was a factor. The equipment was outdated. After the 3rd failure, somebody asked him a simple question. What part of this was your responsibility? He sat there for almost 10 seconds. Then changed the subject. That answer told us everything. The hardest thing in the world isn't accepting criticism from other people. The hardest thing is accepting responsibility from yourself, because responsibility removes your excuses. And excuses are comfortable, very comfortable. The problem is that comfort and growth rarely travel together. I've learned that lesson repeatedly throughout my life, especially early in my military career. People often assume I was naturally good at everything. I wasn't, not even close. The first time I attended advanced land navigation training, I got lost, completely lost. Not slightly off course. Lost. The kind of lost where you start checking the same map every 30 seconds hoping reality will somehow change. When the exercise ended, I was embarrassed, frustrated, angry. For about an hour, I mentally blamed everyone except myself. The instructors, the terrain, the map quality, the equipment. Then I sat down and reviewed my mistakes, every single one. And the uncomfortable truth became obvious. The problem wasn't the map. The problem was me. That wasn't a fun realization. But it was useful, and useful truths are worth more than comfortable lies. The next time I attended the same training, I performed dramatically better. Not because I became smarter overnight, because I finally addressed the real problem. My own decisions. That's why I keep coming back to Fiona. Not because she failed the sniper course. People fail difficult courses all the time. There is no shame in that. The shame comes from refusing to learn from the failure. The shame comes from replacing growth with excuses. Nobody forced Fiona to quit. Nobody sabotaged her. Nobody secretly worked against her. Nobody rigged the process. She reached a difficult moment. Then she made a decision. A human decision. A common decision. A decision thousands of people make every day. She chose immediate relief over long-term growth. Then she spent years trying to rewrite that choice. The scary part is how easy that can happen to any of us. Maybe your situation looks different. Maybe you're struggling financially. Maybe your career isn't where you want it to be. Maybe your health has suffered. Maybe your relationships are falling apart. Life is complicated. Not every problem is your fault. That's important. But here's the question that changed my life. What part of it is your responsibility? Not all of it, just your part. That's where progress begins. Because once you identify your role, you gain something valuable: control. You can't control everything. Nobody can. But you can control your choices, your habits, your effort, your preparation, your response. And those things matter more than most people realize. One of the reasons I survived difficult military training wasn't because I was tougher than everyone else. It was because I stopped negotiating with reality. When something wasn't working, I fixed it. When I made mistakes, I owned them. When I failed, I learned from it. Simple. Not easy, but simple. The truth is that growth usually starts with an uncomfortable conversation. Not with your boss, not with your spouse, not with your parents, with yourself. The conversation where you stop asking, who's to blame, and start asking, what can I do differently? That shift changes everything. And before we move on, I want to leave you with something to think about. A question I ask myself whenever life isn't going the way I hoped. Is there something in your life that you've been calling bad luck, when deep down, it's really a consequence you've been avoiding? That's not a judgment, it's an invitation. Because the moment we're honest about our choices is often the exact moment our future starts changing. And sometimes the truth that hurts the most is also the truth that helps the most. That question stayed with me for a long time. In fact, there are days when I still ask it. Not because I'm perfect, far from it. The older I get, the more I realize that growth isn't something you finish. It's something you keep choosing, again and again. And when I think back on everything that happened that night, one moment stands out more than all the others. Not the shooting competition, not the failure report, not the look on Fiona's face. The handshake. Just a simple handshake. Donovan didn't applaud me. He didn't call me a hero. He didn't make a speech. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't need details. He simply looked at the facts, understood what happened, and offered something far more valuable than approval. Respect. Real respect. The older I get, the more I understand how rare that is. Because people often confuse respect with attention. Those are not the same thing. Not even close. Attention is easy to get. You can buy it, you can fake it, you can demand it, you can manufacture it. You can even borrow it for a while. Respect doesn't work that way. Respect is slower, much slower. It grows quietly. Sometimes so quietly that you don't even notice it happening. And that's exactly why it lasts. Think about the people you genuinely respect in your own life. Not the famous ones, not the rich ones. The real ones. The people you trust. The people whose words carry weight. The people you would call at 2 a.m. if your life fell apart. What makes them different? Usually, it isn't their title. It isn't their salary. It isn't the size of their house. It's their character. It's the fact that they do what they say they're going to do. It's the fact that they tell the truth when lying would be easier. It's the fact that they show up when it matters. I've met officers with impressive resumes who couldn't earn the respect of the people working under them. I've also met mechanics, truck drivers, nurses, and school teachers who commanded enormous respect everywhere they went. The difference wasn't status. The difference was consistency. People trust what they can predict. And character is one of the most predictable things a person can possess. A good father earns respect one promise at a time. A good manager earns respect one decision at a time. A good friend earns respect one act of loyalty at a time. Most of those moments never appear on social media. Nobody applauds them. Nobody hands out trophies. Yet those moments build a life. That's why I think so many people chase the wrong things. We're surrounded by messages telling us to look successful, look important, look impressive, look influential. Very few people talk about becoming trustworthy, becoming dependable, becoming disciplined, becoming honest, the things that actually matter, the things that survive after the spotlight moves on. The engagement party taught me something I already knew but needed to remember. A shiny badge can attract attention. Only character can sustain respect. Those are completely different currencies. One spends quickly, the other compounds over time. And if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed because you weren't the loudest person in the room, I want you to hear this. Don't let it distract you. Don't waste years trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided who they think you are. Keep building, keep learning, keep improving, keep doing the work, because eventually reality becomes impossible to hide. The truth has a strange way of surfacing, not always on your schedule, not always dramatically, but eventually. I've learned that some of the most important victories in life aren't visible to anyone else. The moment you choose discipline over excuses, the moment you choose responsibility over blame, the moment you choose integrity over convenience. Nobody may see those moments. Nobody may congratulate you. Nobody may even know they happened. Do them anyway. Because that's where character is built. And character matters most when nobody is watching. Integrity matters most when lying would be easier. Respect is earned long before it is recognized. That's the lesson I carried away from that night. Not because of Fiona, not because of my father, not because of a badge. Because life keeps proving the same truth over and over again. The things it's worth having usually take longer to earn. But once you've earned them, nobody can take them away. Thank you for spending this time with me and staying through the entire story. If this story sent something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, judged by appearances, or forced to prove yourself in silence, then you're exactly why this community exists. Make sure you subscribe and join us. Every day, we share stories that go beyond family drama. Stories about resilience, dignity, accountability, character, and the lessons that help us become stronger people. And if today's story gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, take care of yourself, keep your standards high, and never trade real character for temporary applause. I'll see you in the next story.